Chapter 23, June 13th, 2000, 8:15 p.m. We never were. The house loomed on the street like a specter of its former self, its peeling paint reflecting the muted glow of streetlights that had just turned on in fractured streaks. The dark windows stared back at Gabe and Ashley, blank and watchful, as though the house itself was appraising their presence. The air around the porch was heavy with mildew and an underlying sourness, a decaying breath exhaled from the depths within. Ashley jiggled the doorknob, his flashlight clutched in his other hand. With a sharp inhale, he braced himself and drove his shoulder into the door. The wood groaned before giving way with a splintering crack. "It's unlocked," he muttered, his voice low and tense. Gabe adjusted his jacket, his stomach already tightening. Great, that's not ominous at all. The door swung wide open with a gentle push, its hinges groaning in protest. The smell hit them first, a thick, cloying stench that seemed to crawl into their nostrils and settle deep in their lungs. Gabe instinctively lifted his arm to cover his face, his nose wrinkling. "What the hell?" he muttered, his voice muffled against his sleeve. "What died in here?" "Probably everything," Ashley replied, his flashlight sweeping across the room. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing chaos. The living room exhaled neglect, its air dense with the acrid tang of mildew and the sickly sweetness of rot. Dust-draped furniture loomed in the gloom like forgotten sentinels, their outlines softened by time and decay. Towers of yellowed newspapers and curling magazines teetered dangerously, each threatening to collapse with a whisper of movement, as though the room itself held its breath. The floor was a graveyard of brittle scraps, crumpled paper, shattered glass, and the mummified remains of long-dead insects. The faint scuttling of rats echoed from somewhere deeper inside, their tiny claws clicking against the hardwood floor. A spider dangled from a web spun between two lampshades, its legs twitching as the flashlight's beam passed over it. "Welcome to paradise," Ashley said dryly, stepping inside. Gabe followed hesitantly, his boots crunching against something brittle on the floor. "You sure this guy was supposed to live here?" he asked, his voice edged with disbelief. Ashley shrugged, his flashlight darting to the walls, where faded wallpaper peeled away in long curling strips. "The neighbor said this was his place. It doesn't look like anyone's touched it in months." "Yeah, except for the rats," Gabe muttered, eyeing a dark shape that darted across the room. They moved further in, the stench growing stronger with every step. The kitchen was worse, plates stacked in the sink, crusted with something unidentifiable, and a pot on the stove that had become a breeding ground for mold. A roach skittered across the counter, vanishing into a crack in the wall. "This place is a health hazard," Gabe said, trying to breathe through his mouth. Ashley ignored him, his focus on a narrow hallway that led deeper into the house. "Let's check the bedrooms. Maybe there's something there." The hallway was even darker, the flashlight beams barely cutting through the gloom. The air was thicker here, heavier, and smelled of rot and dampness. The first room they entered was small, the bed unmade and the dresser drawers half open, their contents spilling out. Gabe nudged a pair of socks on the floor with his boot. "Looks like he left in a hurry." Ashley crouched by the bed, pulling open a drawer. Or didn't leave at all. The search continued upstairs, where the second bedroom was a mirror of the first, cluttered, abandoned, and offering no answers. The attic was worse, filled with old boxes, rusted tools, and a bird's nest tucked into one corner. The roof creaked ominously under their weight as they shuffled through the mess. By the time they returned downstairs, frustration was setting in. "This is a dead end," Gabe said, shaking his head. "We're not going to find anything here." Ashley didn't respond immediately. His flashlight lingered on a corner of the living room, where a stack of old newspapers and magazines towered precariously. "There has to be something. I can feel it," he muttered, more to himself than to Gabe. Gabe exhaled sharply, the smell and the futility of the search grating on his nerves. "This is ridiculous. We're chasing shadows. He kicked at the nearest stack of newspapers, sending them toppling over. The mess scattered across the floor, revealing the scratched surface of the hardwood beneath. Real mature, Ashley said, his tone biting. Yeah, well, I'm not exactly feeling like a team player right now, Gabe shot back. Ashley ignored him, stepping closer to the area Gabe had cleared. His flashlight traced the floor, the beam catching something odd. Wait, he said, his voice sharp. Look at this. Gabe frowned, stepping closer. What? Ashley dropped to one knee, his flashlight casting stark shadows on the scratched floorboards. Look at this, he murmured, pointing to faint grooves etched into the wood. The marks were subtle, nearly lost beneath the grime, but their deliberate path led directly to the sagging bookshelf. Something heavy was dragged or pushed right here. His voice carried a weight that made Gabe's unease deepen. Gabe squinted, following the lines with his eyes. They led directly to the bookshelf against the wall, its shelves crammed with a chaotic mix of books, knickknacks, and dust. You think? Gabe questioned. Only one way to find out, Ashley replied, standing and moving toward the bookshelf. He ran his fingers along the edge, testing its weight. Help me with this. Together, they pushed. The bookshelf groaned in protest, the wood scraping against the floor. Inch by inch, it slid to the side, revealing a narrow door set into the wall. Hidden door, Gabe muttered. That's not creepy at all. Ashley tested the handle. Locked. Of course. He exhaled sharply, stepping back. Figures, got anything to pop this open? Gabe reached into his pocket, fishing out a small multi-tool. Let's hope this works. The silence stretched thin as he worked, the faint scrape of metal against metal filling the room. Each failed attempt ratcheted up the tension, the seconds dragging, the stillness pressing in. Then, click. The latch gave way and the door creaked open, revealing a staircase swallowed by darkness. Ashley's flashlight swept over the descending steps, the beams swallowed at the edges. His jaw tightened. Basement! Gabe peered over his shoulder, his gut already twisting at the cold air seeping up from below. It was stale, heavy, thicker than it should have been. You sure we want to do this? Ashley didn't answer. He took the first step down, his flashlight cutting through the blackness. Gabe sighed, fingers brushing against the butt of his holstered gun before following reluctantly. Halfway down, Ashley slowed, his beam catching on a rusted breaker box mounted to the wall. Hold up. Gabe squinted at it, steadying himself against the damp wall. Might be nice to actually see what we're walking into. Ashley handed him the flashlight. All right, you hold this. Gabe aimed the beam as Ashley flipped the switch. A harsh buzz filled the air. Then, the basement blinked to life. Flickering fluorescent lights sputtered overhead, washing the space in a sickly glow. And for a moment, neither of them spoke, because now, in the light, they could finally see what they had walked into. The basement was an unnerving contradiction to the decay above, a sterile haven of unsettling precision. The walls were lined with meticulously arranged shelves, each holding neatly labeled binders, stacked boxes, and carefully cataloged items. The space exuded a cold, clinical order that felt more calculated than clean, as though it had been curated for a purpose too disturbing to guess. But it was the evidence board on the far wall that drew their focus. Sprawled across its surface was a chaotic tapestry of photographs, maps, and notes, connected by an intricate web of red string. At its center, pinned like a macabre trophy, was a grainy photograph of two figures standing in the street. Gabe's stomach twisted as he realized the unmistakable outlines of himself and Ashley. Holy shit, Gabe whispered, stepping forward, his breath catching in his throat. Ashley moved beside him, his flashlight beam steady on the board. His voice dropped, low and edged with disbelief. This isn't a random stash. This is... He paused, the weight of realization pressing down as his eyes lingered on the tangled web of evidence. This is us. Why the hell are we on this wall? Ashley's jaw tightened as his gaze shifted, taking in the intricate details of the board. "Someone's been watching us," he said, his voice edged with tension. "Whoever put this together knows more than we do." The fluorescent lights hummed faintly, their uneven glow creating shifting shadows that danced like specters along the walls. Gabe's hand drifted to his holstered gun, his pulse quickening as the room seemed to breathe around them, each flicker of light deepening the sense of being watched. "We need to secure this scene," Ashley said, his voice steadier now but filled with urgency. He pointed toward a small desk tucked into the corner. "Start there. Let's figure out what we're dealing with." No, but before they could take another step, the lights flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness once more. The sound came again, faint but unmistakable, a metallic scrape that seemed to shiver through the air. It was closer this time, the kind of noise that didn't belong, echoing with a cold, deliberate rhythm. It felt less like the shifting of an old house and more like the prelude to something waiting, watching, just beyond the edge of the light. Gabe's flashlight beam wavered as his grip tightened. "Ashley," he said, his voice low, "tell me you heard that." Ashley didn't reply immediately. His own flashlight was fixed on the far wall, the evidence board now barely visible in the dim light. Finally, his voice came, low and grim. "I heard it," his tone grim. For a moment, the two detectives stood frozen, the oppressive silence of the basement wrapping around them like a shroud. Then Ashley took a step forward, his movements slow and deliberate. Gabe followed, his breath coming in shallow bursts. Ashley turned his flashlight toward the source, his grip steady. "Stay close," he said, his voice just above a whisper. Gabe nodded, though his heart was pounding so loudly it felt as though it would give them away. The two detectives moved forward, their flashlights cutting jagged paths through the oppressive darkness. Every step felt like a challenge, the silence around them thickening into something almost tangible. The metallic sound grew louder, its source tantalizingly close yet cloaked in the shadows. Gabe's breath came in shallow bursts as he whispered, "Ashley, what if we're not alone?" Ashley's jaw tightened, his voice steady despite the tension etched into his every movement. "We never were." Chapter 24, June 14th, 2000, 8:57 a.m. Shadows were chasing them. Morning brought no reprieve. The house stood in weary defiance, its peeling paint hanging in jagged strips, curling away from the weathered wood like the remnants of a shedding skin. The front yard sprawled wild and feral, a tangle of weeds intertwined with scattered refuse, clawing at the air as though trying to reclaim what had been forsaken. Bright yellow caution tape looped the perimeter, fluttering faintly in the breeze, a stark accusatory barrier against the decay, warning all who approached that this place held more than just neglect. The generators thrummed steadily, their mechanical hum reverberating through the walls like an artificial heartbeat, unyielding and oppressive. Floodlights carved through the darkness of the basement, their harsh beams slicing the air with surgical precision, laying bare every flaw, every speck of decay. Dust motes twisted and spiraled in the light, caught in an aimless chaotic dance that mimed the unspoken tension between Gabe and Ashley. The air hung heavy, thick with the mingling stench of mildew and gasoline, pressing down on them like a shroud. Gabe and Ashley stood shoulder to shoulder, their profiles half drowned in the interplay of harsh light and deep shadow. Their silence was its own language, reflecting the doubts and questions that churned within, unspoken but palpable, as though the room itself held its breath alongside them. The stale air of the basement was heavier now, compounded by the weight of the questions that had brought them back here. The sour tang of mildew mixed with the lingering scent of gasoline from the generators made the space feel suffocating, as though it were alive and watching. Ashley adjusted his tie out of habit, though the gesture seemed more about grounding himself than maintaining appearances. "Hell of a morning," he muttered, breaking the stillness. His flashlight lay discarded on a folding table they'd set up to organize their findings, now unnecessary under the blaring floodlights. Gabe was silent, his focus consumed by the evidence wall, a sprawling labyrinth of photographs, notes, and frenzied red string that crisscrossed the corkboard in chaotic symmetry. His fingers brushed lightly over the pinned items as if the touch might extract hidden truths. His blue eyes darted from image to image, absorbing each fragment of information with a machine-like precision, the weight of the puzzle pressing visibly on his furrowed brow. "You seeing this?" he finally asked, his voice tight with concentration. He pointed to a section of notes pinned haphazardly near the center of the wall. Ashley leaned in, squinting. His eyes scanned the words, their blunt simplicity landing like a sucker punch. Human sleep cycle. Summary: NREM. Stage 1 to NREM, Stage 2 to NREM, Stage 3 to REM sleep. Early in the night, deep sleep, NREM Stage 3, dominates. The words were underlined multiple times in red pen, the lines erratic, as though the hand that wrote them had been trembling or mind not totally there. Beneath the summary were crude sketches of a human brain with arrows pointing to sections labeled DMT release and reality manipulation. "What the hell does this mean?" Ashley muttered, running a hand through his dark hair. "This guy's connecting dots that don't even exist." Gabe stepped back, rubbing the bridge of his nose as if trying to massage clarity from the chaos in front of him. Or maybe we're the blind ones. What if the pattern's right there and we're just too close to see it? Ashley snorted, the sound carrying more unease than humor. "Great. Let's add sleep cycles and brain chemicals to our list of shit we don't understand." The two detectives moved in tandem, their movements almost synchronized as they scanned the wall. Gabe's gaze lingered on a cluster of photographs pinned in the upper left corner. Most were grainy images of nondescript locations, abandoned buildings, quiet suburban streets, empty playgrounds. But what drew his attention was a handwritten list of what looked like 100 names, tacked beside them with names crossed off and circled: Patrick Smith, Jamie Choi, Daniel Broderick, Riley Wilson, Tony DeRayle, Michelle Lewis. One final name had been scratched out but also circled, leaving only the faint trace of the letter D. "Why is Michelle Lewis's name not crossed out?" Ashley mumbled to himself. A half-smudged map of the city hung below the list, with small red dots marking locations. Gabe counted 7, each one meticulously circled. Ashley caught the shift in Gabe's focus, his voice low and probing. "Something about those names sticking out to you, or are we just reading shadows again?" Gabe shook his head, his voice low. "Not yet, but look at this." He gestured to a note written in blocky, uneven letters in the circle. "Obel, Obel, Obel," repeated obsessively. Ashley frowned. Bingo was his name, O. His voice trailed off as his finger landed on a section of scribbled notes. The Book of Devon. "This is a link, right? They're tying this whole mess to mythology and a conspiracy book?" "Not just mythology." Gabe tapped another section of the wall where the phrase DMT/dream/reality manipulation was scrawled in looping, almost frantic handwriting. Besides, there were more diagrams, human figures, brainwave charts, and a crude sketch of what looked like a split in the earth. "This isn't just fixation," Gabe murmured, his tone threaded with unease and fascination. "This guy doesn't want to understand the afterlife. He's obsessed with controlling it." The floodlights buzzed, their steady hum punctuated by the occasional crackle of the generator. Ashley moved to a different section of the wall, his eyes narrowing as he scanned a cluster of newspaper clippings. Most were mundane articles about local crimes, obituaries, and missing persons. But one headline stood out since this article had the number 6 written all over it in black marker. Connor Construction caught in a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. Ashley ripped the article from the wall, holding it up for Gabe to see. "You think this ties into our cases?" Gabe took the clipping, his brow furrowing as he read. "Maybe. Or maybe it's another one of his wild connections. Either way, we can't ignore it." The two fell into a tense silence, each absorbed in their own corner of the wall, The only sounds were the buzz of the lights and the faint rustle of paper as they sifted through the clues. Then Ashley pointed his flashlight beam at the photograph pinned near the center of the board that they found last night, a grainy black and white image of two men standing outside a sandwich shop. Gabe and Ashley. It doesn't make sense. Why the hell are we here? Ashley's voice was tight, almost cracking. He yanked the photo from the board and turned it toward Gabe. And what's with these labels? Pillar, anchor, and a bunch of question marks? His hand trembled slightly. Gabe stared at the photo, his stomach tightening. His mind raced, trying to piece together the implications. He's been watching us, he said finally, his voice hollow. Whoever this John Doe guy is, he knows who we are. Ashley's jaw clenched. This case just went from weird to personal. A metallic crash fractured the fragile stillness, the sound ricocheting off the basement walls like a gunshot in a tomb. Both men moved as one, their hands instinctively flying to their weapons, muscles taut with the electric snap of coiled tension. What the hell was that? Ashley murmured, his voice slicing through the steady hum of the generators. His eyes darted toward the shadowed corner of the room where the sound had originated, the darkness seeming to ripple in answer. Gabe's hand hovered near his holster, his flashlight beam sweeping over the stacks of boxes. The far wall loomed, cloaked in shadow, its silence now ominous. "Stay here," Gabe said, his voice a mix of authority and unease. Ashley ignored him, stepping forward with his weapon drawn. "Not a chance. Let's move." The two approached the boxes cautiously, their flashlights slicing through the darkness. The generators hummed louder in their ears, a grating reminder of their isolation. When they reached the boxes, they found nothing but old rusted rat traps, their sprungs snapped shut. But the tension didn't fade. Both men knew the feeling of being watched, and it was thick in the air now, as palpable as the damp concrete beneath their feet. Ashley's gaze snagged on a crumpled piece of paper near the baseboard, partially hidden beneath a rusted metal trap. He bent down, his hand hesitating for a fraction of a second before picking it up. The paper was brittle, the ink smeared, but one detail stood out in sharp clarity, a date scrawled in uneven handwriting. "It's a date," Ashley murmured, his voice uneven as if the words themselves carried weight. He tilted the brittle paper toward the light, the ink faded but unmistakable. April 29th, 1996. Gabe stopped in his tracks, his stomach tightening. The numbers on the page felt heavier than they should, like lead pressing against his ribs. "What does it mean?" he asked, though deep down he already knew. Ashley's fingers clenched around the fragile paper, the edges crumbling slightly beneath his grip. His breath hitched, his jaw locking as a familiar weight coiled around his chest. No, it couldn't be. But it was. His voice, when he finally spoke, was raw and stripped bare. "That's the day Brad died." The floodlights flickered, once, twice, before steadying. The basement seemed to contract around them, the air thick with something unseen, something waiting. Neither man spoke. They weren't just chasing shadows, the shadows were chasing them. Chapter 25, June 17th, 2000, 6:34 p.m. It was about redemption. The precinct's bullpen thrummed with tension, its chaos subdued but palpable. Phones trilled sporadically, the cadence blending with hurried footsteps and low murmurs like an uneasy symphony. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, their sterile glow rendering every detail harsh and unforgiving, overfilled trash cans, teetering stacks of files, and the lingering haze of burnt coffee curling like a specter above it all. Gabe sat hunched over his desk, and each photograph scattered before him a shard of a puzzle whose image refused to surface. His eyes, sharp but tired, flicked between the photos as if willing to form a coherent picture, the furrow in his brow deepening with each passing second. Across from him, Ashley leaned back in his chair, his arms crossing tightly over his chest, as if trying to shield himself from the weight pressing down on him. The tension in his shoulders etched lines of strain across his face, his jaw clenched as though to hold back the ghosts of his past. Finally, with a breath that came out jagged, he reached for the photo he'd been avoiding, the crumpled paper from the basement. The date scrawled across it, April 29th, 1996, pulsed in his mind like a heartbeat, each digit carved deep into the fabric of his memory, a wound that refused to heal. His grip tightened around the edges of the photo as if he could crush the memory beneath his fingers. "Where are you going?" Gabe's voice cut through the bullpen's noise, his sharp gaze flicking to the photo in Ashley's hand. A teasing smirk tugged at his lips. "What, you got some secret love letter in those tiny baby hands of yours?" Ashley didn't look up. "My hands are average-sized," he shot back, but there was no real bite to it. Gabe chuckled, but it faded when he saw the way Ashley's shoulders tensed. His pencil hovered over the notebook, waiting. "You've been staring at that date." His voice lost its usual playfulness. "Something about it sticking with you." Ashley exhaled slowly, fingers tightening around the edge of the photo before he pinned it back on the board. "Yeah." Gabe studied him, the weight behind that single word sinking in. He wasn't going to push. Not yet. "You think it's a coincidence?" Ashley scoffed, shaking his head. "There's no such thing as coincidence, Gabe. Not in this job." They both turned to the evidence board, its web of photos, notes, and interwoven red threads forming a jagged constellation of half-truths. The details were all there, but none of them made sense. Not yet. The date sat in the middle of it all, like a splinter buried deep under the skin. "Feels like we're looking at a mirror," Gabe muttered, his arms crossed. "Like this isn't just a case anymore. We're in the damn thing." Ashley's jaw tightened. "That's what's bothering me." Gabe leaned against the desk beside him. "So, what's next?" Ashley ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "We keep digging." His voice was steadier now, but there was something else beneath it, a storm just waiting to break. Gabe nodded, grabbing his coffee. "Yeah, thought you'd say that." The evidence board towered over the room like a specter, its tangled web of photographs, hastily scribbled notes, and interwoven red threads forming a maddening constellation of half-truths. Shadows danced across its surface, each pinned fragment a cryptic clue that taunted them with its refusal to fit into the larger picture. Each pinned item felt deliberate, a breadcrumb leading toward an unseen predator. It wasn't just a collection of their work anymore. It was a mirror, reflecting back their sleepless nights, their unanswered questions, and the chilling truth that they weren't just investigators anymore. They were part of the puzzle. "Find anything?" Gabe's voice cut through the silence, light and casual but with an undercurrent of concern. Ashley didn't turn. "Just the same crap we've been looking at for hours." "Everything about this case seems personal," Gabe replied, standing. He crossed the room and leaned against the desk next to the evidence board. Ashley nodded, his gaze shifting back to the board. The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the faint hum of the building's HVAC system. Gabe watched Ashley carefully, his own mind racing. He knew Ashley held Brad's weight on his shoulders, so he did what good friends do: listen. Ashley's fingers hovered over the photo, the edges curling slightly under his grip. His voice, when he spoke, was low and raw, each word dragged from a place he rarely allowed himself to revisit. "We were following a lead. It wasn't solid, but Brad, he had this instinct. He'd dive headfirst into the flames if it meant pulling someone out. I told him to wait, to hold off until backup came." He paused, his throat working around the words. But Brad didn't wait. He never waited. His hand dropped, the photo fluttering slightly before he caught it. "But he didn't listen. He never did. He went in alone and I—" He stopped, his throat working as he swallowed hard. "I wasn't fast enough." Gabe said nothing, letting the words come. "He didn't come out," Ashley finished, his voice barely above a whisper. His fingers tightened on the photo, creasing the edges. "And I've spent every day since wondering if I could have done something different." Gabe crossed his arms, leaning against the desk. You blame yourself. Every damn day, Ashley snapped, the words tearing out of him like they'd been waiting too long. His chest heaved. He turned on Gabe, eyes raw, not just angry, but hollowed out by something deeper. And for what? What the hell is this all for? He motioned toward the case file, and then the board, like the chaos there, could answer him. This date, it's not random. None of this is. He's not just playing games, he's building something. Step by step. Like he wants us to see it, but only when it's too late to stop it. Ashley's voice dropped lower, but the tension climbed higher. He's not doing this for revenge or chaos. He's designing it, like he's working off a blueprint we haven't seen yet. Gabe straightened, his own mind spinning. So what do we do? Ashley stared at the board, his eyes narrowing. We find him, and we end this. They stood in silence, the weight of their shared determination hanging heavy between them. Gabe's gaze wandered back to the evidence board, his fingers brushing against a piece of paper pinned near the top. It was a fragment of a map marked with 7 red dots. Each one was labeled with a name. Patrick Smith, Jamie Choi, Daniel Broderick, Gabe read aloud, his voice steady. These names, they're tied to the book, aren't they? Ashley nodded. And now we're on that wall, too. Gabe's eyes flicked to a grainy photo of the 2 detectives on the board, tapping the photo, trying to think. The tapping hung in the air like a threat, the implications settling over them like a storm cloud. Ashley turned away from the board, pacing the length of the room. His mind churned, replaying every detail they'd uncovered, every name, every connection. I don't like being someone's pawn, he muttered, his voice hard. Neither do I, Gabe said, his tone steady despite the storm raging beneath. But if we're pieces on the board, then it's time we figured out the rules. Ashley stopped pacing, his gaze locking onto Gabe's with a weight that made the air between them seem heavier. This isn't a game, he said, his voice steady but cold. It's a trap, and we're already inside it. Gabe didn't flinch, his expression a mirror of quiet resolve. Then let's make sure we're the ones who set it off. For the first time that night, Ashley's hardened demeanor cracked. A faint smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. You're lucky you've got good lines. Otherwise, I'd call you reckless. Gabe returned the smirk, his eyes glinting with a mix of humor and determination. And you're lucky you've got me, Ash. Otherwise, you'd never get anything done. The faint sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway outside, drawing both their attention. Ashley's hand instinctively went to his hip, resting on his holstered weapon. The tension in the room ratcheted up a notch. The door creaked open, revealing Captain Marshall. His sharp gaze swept over the room, taking in the evidence board and the detectives' tense stances. I take it you 2 are still at it, he said, his tone gruff but not unkind. We're close, Ashley replied, his voice steady. Marshall nodded, stepping inside. His presence filled the room, grounding the chaotic energy that had been building. Whatever you're chasing, make sure it doesn't chase you back. Ashley exchanged a glance with Gabe, the captain's words resonating in a way that neither of them wanted to admit. Marshall turned to leave, pausing at the door. And Ashley, he added, his tone softer, let the past be the past. It's the only way you'll move forward. Ashley didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the evidence board. Gabe watched him carefully, the weight of the moment settling over them. Ashley let out a long breath as the door closed behind the captain. He's right, he said quietly, but I don't know if I can. Gabe clapped a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to do it alone. Ashley smiled for the first time that night, a small, fleeting expression, but genuine. Thanks, Gabe. The 2 detectives returned to the board, their determination renewed. The answers were there, buried beneath the chaos. They just had to find them. And for Ashley, finding those answers wasn't just about solving the case, it was about redemption. Chapter 26, June 20th, 2000, 10:27 a.m., Frozen. The bullpen held its breath. Phones rang, keyboards clacked, but everything felt submerged, like sound itself was holding back, waiting for something to crack. Sunlight slashed through the blinds and fractured bars, casting restless shadows that crawled the walls like they wanted out. Gabe stood before the photo wall like a man waiting for a sentence. His shoulders didn't sag with sleep. They sagged with too many questions that refused to answer themselves. The web of red string, pinned notes, and faded photos stretched like nerve endings, each one tugging him deeper into something he couldn't name yet. His hand hovered over a single note, DMT/dream/reality manipulation, like it might burn truth into his skin if he touched it. Behind him, Ashley sat slouched in his chair, twisting a paperclip into a crooked spiral. The shadows under his eyes looked permanent now, carved by too many nights without sleep and days packed with questions that circled back to silence. His tie hung loose, forgotten. The pale imprint of his missing watch caught the light, a quiet marker of time he no longer kept. The door creaked open. Karen stepped inside with movements carved from stone, precise but heavy, as if she had to drag each one out of herself. A coffee cup steamed in her hand, the spirals rising toward the ceiling lights like smoke from a battlefield. The bruises across her cheekbone and temple were beginning to fade, but they still caught the light, green and violet echoes of a fight survived, not forgotten. She didn't speak, neither did they. The silence wasn't awkward, it was loaded, like the room itself was waiting for someone to crack. Gabe's eyes stayed fixed on the board, his hand brushing the corner of a weathered note, DMT/dream/reality manipulation. He exhaled through his nose, low and tight. None of this makes any damn sense, he muttered. His voice was steady, but his frustration ran just beneath it, brittle and sharp. He leaned in as if the scrawled ink might change under pressure. DMT dreams? Reality manipulation? What the hell is he chasing? His fingers traced the phrase again, slower this time, like the act might summon insight. I've never touched this stuff, didn't need to, but this guy treats it like a key, like whatever he's chasing only opens if he turns the right lock. He glanced over his shoulder at Karen. I'm going to need to dig into this, properly. There was something in his voice, uncertainty maybe, or the low thrum of someone realizing the rules no longer applied. Ashley looked up, his brows furrowing. It's bullshit, he muttered. The guy's stringing together random ideas and calling it a plan. He probably watched The Matrix one too many times. Karen didn't laugh, but a ghost of a smirk touched her lips. She stepped closer to the board, eyes narrowing as she scanned the mess of photographs, scribbled notes, and crisscrossed string. Or maybe he's seeing something we're not, she said quietly, placing her coffee on the desk without taking a sip. Gabe rubbed the back of his neck, frustration simmering just beneath the surface. John's not rambling, he's mapping something. Look at this. He motioned to a section of the board where 5 names were pinned close together. Patrick Smith, Jamie Choi, Daniel Broderick, Riley Wilson, Tony DeRail. Each had a note beneath it, each marked in Gabe's own scrawl. Karen's brows drew together as she leaned in. What about them? Well, the names were all on the same board as the Book of Devon notes, Gabe said. Every single one of them. Ashley stood, his voice quieter now. And those notes underneath, those aren't charges or case details. They're, what, characteristics? Labels? Gabe followed his gaze. That's what I've been trying to figure out. Each one feels like a role, a type, like he's assigning them parts in some twisted play. Karen crossed her arms. But what's the story? Gabe exhaled through his nose. That's the part I can't see yet. Karen stared at the board, her expression darkening. This isn't just about murder or some manifesto, she said slowly. It's personal. He's watching us, staging moments. That stunt at the street, him showing up out of nowhere, he's going out of his way to get close, to me, to all of us. Gabe stepped back, arms crossed, brow furrowed. But why? What's the end game? Ashley let out a sharp breath, running a hand through his hair. Who the hell knows? But this guy isn't just picking names out of a hat. He's building something, layer by layer. Before they could press further, the door creaked open and Kayla appeared in the doorway, a clipboard tucked tightly to her chest. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced by a stiff unease. "Karen," she said, her voice tentative, "you wanted me to pull the files on those names that are circled to see if we had anything in the system. Well?" Karen nodded, snapping her focus to Kayla like flipping a switch. "Yeah, what did you find?" Kayla lingered in the doorway, her silhouette framed in the fractured light, posture stiff and eyes wide. The clipboard hugged her chest like armor, her knuckles pale from gripping it too tightly. Something in her face, usually poised, precise, was cracked now. Like she'd seen something she wasn't meant to. She hesitated, just enough to make the room hold its breath, then looked at each of them, one by one, like she was about to hand out a death sentence. Then, with a breath that shook at the edges, she stepped forward and handed the clipboard to Karen. "The files are gone," she said, each word steady on the surface, but unraveling underneath like a thread pulled too tight. Not lost, not misfiled, wiped. The word hit like a slap. "All that's left are mugshots and names," she continued, her eyes darting toward the board. "No addresses, no priors, no paper trail, like someone wanted us to remember their faces, but forget who they were." Silence stretched long and thin. Ashley took a step forward, voice low and sharp. "What do you mean, gone? How the hell does that happen?" Kayla raised a hand, not to stop him, but as if fending off something she couldn't quite explain. "It gets worse." Her voice cracked now despite the effort to hold it together. "The system shows they were all released on bail, every last one." Gabe blinked. "No, that doesn't happen." Kayla shook her head. "There's no record of who paid, no bondsman, no traceable transfer. It's like they just walked out." Karen's fingers dug into the clipboard, flipping through the scant pages like she could will more into existence. Her mouth set into a line so tight it looked carved in stone. "Someone's cleaning up after him, badly, I may add," she said flatly. Ashley turned back to the board, fists clenched at his sides. "No, this isn't cleanup, it's setup, and we're already behind." Karen lowered the clipboard, her eyes still scanning the board. "John's not acting alone. He's orchestrating this, and if these people are free—" "They're not just out," Ashley snapped. "They're in on it, and we've been playing catch-up since day one." The silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt rigged, like a trap they'd just realized they were standing in. The room froze beneath the weight of Kayla's revelation. Karen moved to the filing cabinet with slow, deliberate steps. The drawer screeched open, too loud in the silence, and she began sorting through the few remaining files like she could salvage something from the wreckage. Her hands moved with mechanical precision, but her eyes were searching. "We need a plan," Gabe said finally, his voice cracking the stillness. "This isn't just about solving a case anymore. It never was. We need to get ahead of John before he makes his next move." Ashley didn't answer right away. His gaze locked on the board like it was trying to whisper the answers. "We start with the book," he said, voice low. "It's all in there. The symbols, the archetypes, maybe even the endgame." "I'll handle that," Gabe replied. "Tonight." He turned to Karen. "The names. What's left of them? Whoever wiped the files left just enough to taunt us. We need to figure out why." Karen slammed the cabinet drawer shut. The sound made Kayla flinch. "They want us chasing ghosts," she muttered. "But that means they're still watching, still listening." Ashley turned, suddenly sharper. "Then what the hell are we waiting for?" A beat of silence, tense, thin, and then burring. A phone shrieked from somewhere in the building. Not a polite ring, a scream, jagged and urgent. Everyone flinched. Kayla's eyes widened. "That's line 6, she whispered. "That's never supposed to ring unless—" The ringing cut off. A second passed. Then the intercom crackled to life. Detectives Gabe and Ashley, line 6, now. The voice wasn't one they recognized. Gabe reached for the receiver, but Karen caught his arm, her grip cold and tight. "Don't say your name," she said. "Just listen." He picked it up. Silence on the other end. Then, click. And breathing. Shallow, measured, too calm. Gabe opened his mouth, but the voice slipped through first, whispered, intimate, terrifying, low, rhythmic, familiar in the way nightmares are, like a lullaby sung wrong. "I am the color red in a world painted black and white. You ever wonder what makes a man like me? Is it pain? No, pain is just a tool. Is it power, respect, money? Maybe once. There are all kinds of men, Detective Gabriel Woodward. There are men who dream and never leave the couch. There are men who dream and fail, crushed under the weight of wanting. And there are the ones who dream loud enough to wake the whole damn world. So tell me, Gabe, which one are you?" Click. Silence followed like a curtain drop. No dial tone, just Gabe, holding the receiver, frozen. Chapter 27, June 22nd, 2000, 11:45 a.m., fractured but unbroken. The precinct pulsed with restless energy, the clamor of ringing phones and clattering keyboards intertwining like a chaotic symphony. Outside, the June heat pressed against the windows, muffling the sounds of the city and turning the precinct into a pressure cooker of frayed nerves and unanswered questions. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their cold glare bouncing off scuffed floors and cluttered desks, each piled high with the weight of unsolved cases. Gabe sat hunched at his desk, his pen tapping a measured beat against the wood, a subconscious attempt to impose order on the chaos threatening to unravel around him. The map pinned beside him seemed to loom, its red pins marking locations like open wounds, each demanding answers he didn't yet have. Ashley approached with his signature nonchalance, his trench coat still a part of his persona despite the summer's warmth. The faint scent of cigarette smoke clung to him, a reminder of old habits that served as anchors in a world too easily untethered. His movements were unhurried, but his eyes betrayed a restless energy, scanning the precinct like a man who couldn't afford to miss the slightest detail. "Lunch break," he declared, his tone carrying the kind of authority only hunger could justify. "Karen's tagging along. Don't bother arguing." His lips twitched in a smirk as he nudged one of Gabe's carefully arranged notes askew. Gabe didn't look up, his eyes glued to a map pinned to the corkboard beside his desk. Red pins marked locations that now felt as familiar to him as his own home. "Get me a turkey club," he replied absent-mindedly, circling something on his notepad. "No mayo." Ashley smirked and straightened, his fingers brushing the edge of the map. "You should take a break, Gabe." "I will when we figure this out," Gabe shot back, his tone clipped but not unkind. "You two enjoy your lunch." Karen stepped into the bullpen, the summer air clinging to her like an unwelcome reminder of the outside world. Her pale blue scarf hung loosely now, more habit than necessity, framing bruises that the fluorescent lights failed to soften. With each step, her expression was composed, yet her eyes carried a shadowed weight, a fleeting vulnerability masked by the purposeful way she adjusted her coat and offered Gabe a faint practice smile. "We'll bring you something good." Gabe nodded, already lost in his notes. The city streets simmered under the lingering heat of the day, the pavement radiating warmth even as the shadows lengthened. Karen and Ashley walked side by side, their footsteps muted against the sticky asphalt, the summer air thick with the mingling sense of exhaust and roasting street food. A street vendor's cart steamed nearby, the aroma of hot pretzels and sizzling hot dogs mingling with the ever-present exhaust fumes and the earthy musk of wet concrete. Above them, a flickering neon sign buzzed faintly, its broken letters spelling out a half-hearted "welcome." Ashley pulled out a cigarette and lit it, the flare of the lighter briefly illuminating his face. He took a long drag and exhaled, the the smoke curling upward before dissipating into the humid summer air. As they turned a corner, they passed a man sitting on the curb, his jacket threadbare and his face drawn with exhaustion. He clutched a bottle wrapped in a crumpled brown bag, his hands trembling slightly. Ashley slowed, his dark eyes narrowing. "Maybe you should cut back on that," Ashley said, gesturing with his cigarette. The man looked up, his gaze sharp despite the haze of his situation. "Look who's talking," he retorted, nodding toward the cigarette in Ashley's hand. Karen stifled a laugh, elbowing Ashley gently. "You can't help everyone, you know," she said, her voice carrying a note of dry humor but also a hint of truth. Ashley took another drag, his expression unreadable. "Doesn't mean I shouldn't try." The diner was a small, unassuming spot tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. Its neon sign flickered intermittently, casting a faint glow over the sidewalk. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of frying bacon and freshly brewed coffee, a welcome escape from the lingering heat outside. The overhead fans whirred lazily, doing little to chase away the warmth that clung to everything like a second skin. They slid into a booth by the window, Karen pulling her scarf loose and Ashley shrugging off his coat. A waitress appeared almost instantly, her pen poised over a notepad. They ordered quickly. Ashley opted for a greasy burger, Karen chose a simple salad, and Gabe's turkey club was added to the list. As the waitress disappeared behind the counter, Karen leaned back, letting her fingers trail meaningless circles into the condensation on her glass. Her voice came low, but it landed heavy. "You ever get tired of pretending you've got it all under control?" she asked, her voice soft but sharp like a whisper cutting through the fog. Ashley's grip on his coffee mug tightened, the heat seeping into his skin as if to remind him he was still present. His jaw clenched, the tension breaking through the veneer of calm he struggled to maintain. His gaze locked on the cracks in the vinyl booth, a futile attempt to find answers in its imperfect geometry. Finally, he exhaled, his voice quiet but loaded with the kind of weariness that didn't come from lack of sleep. "If I fall apart," Ashley said, staring into his coffee, "there's no one left to hold the seams. That's the job, right? You break in private, you patch up in public," he said, his voice low. Karen tilted her head. "You know that's not strength, it's slow suicide, right?" Ashley scoffed, then stared into his coffee like it might offer him a different answer. "We don't get to break down. We're the ones who hold the tape while the world falls apart." Karen studied him for a long moment. "You mean cops or whatever we've become chasing this thing?" Her tone was still gentle, but the edge of doubt had crept in. Ashley smirked, deflecting. "The kind where you keep moving forward, no matter what." The waitress returned with their food, setting the plates down with a practiced smile. Karen murmured a thank you, but her eyes didn't leave Ashley. She waited until the server walked away, then leaned forward slightly, her voice low. "Gabe's a good partner," she said, then paused. "But you and him, you carry pain like it's proof you've survived, like it earns you something, a badge maybe. But that kind of weight doesn't just sit there forever. One of you is going to break, and I don't want to be around when it happens." Ashley didn't respond right away. He picked up a fry, stared at it like it might offer a better answer, and then finally spoke. "Yeah," he said quietly. "He's a good guy, the kind you can talk to and he just hears you. Don't try to fix it, just let it be real." Karen smiled faintly, her gaze dropping to her glass. "That must be nice. Most people I get to talk to are the ones who still don't think they've done anything wrong." Ashley looked at her then, his expression softening. "You're good at what you do, Karen. Don't sell yourself short." She met his gaze, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her features. "We both lost something that day," she said quietly. Ashley's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Yeah, and it's not coming back." Karen straightened, her shoulders squaring as if physically pushing the thought away. "Let's make sure we finish this story, Ashley, whatever it takes." Ashley leaned back, his fingers drumming lightly against the edge of the table. "We will." The walk back to the precinct was cloaked in heavy silence. the earlier banter replaced by an unspoken understanding that words would only complicate things. The thick summer air clung to them, heavy and unrelenting, carrying the distant hum of traffic and the faint scent of hot asphalt. Each step felt deliberate, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but loaded with thoughts too tangled to untangle aloud. Ashley's gaze lingered on a passing mother wrangling groceries and a crying toddler, the faintest flicker of something, regret perhaps, crossing his features before he turned away. Karen walked slightly ahead, her steps brisk but purposeful, as if putting distance between herself and her thoughts. "Even though I'll be in the background since I'm still on the mend," she said, adjusting her scarf, "I'm here to help." Ashley offered her a rare, genuine smile. "I know, Karen, and we're lucky to have you." "Did you notice Gabe hasn't said a word about that call?" Karen asked, voice low. "It's like he's trying to outrun it, inside his own head." Ashley nodded slowly. "He's good at burying things. Too good." As they stepped back into the precinct, the familiar hum of activity wrapped around them. Gabe sat hunched at his desk, his hand clenched around a pen that hadn't moved in over 10 minutes. When he finally looked up, his eyes were blank, too blank, as if he'd practiced hiding whatever that call carved into him. He nodded at them, but the motion was robotic, rehearsed. Whatever that voice said, it hadn't left him. It was still there, crouched behind his silence. He gave them a nod, tight and practiced, then looked back down like the page could distract him from the weight pressing behind his eyes. Karen set the sandwich in front of Gabe with deliberate care, her voice slipping into the practiced calm of someone used to managing chaos. "Eat. The world won't end if you take 5 minutes to chew something." Her smile was faint but genuine, a small crack in the armor she wore so well. Gabe smirked, taking the sandwich without looking up. "Thanks." Ashley met Karen's gaze, their shared silence thick with the weight of unspoken truths. The evidence board loomed ahead, its tangled threads a haunting mirror of their fractured lives. Side by side, they stepped closer, the hum of the precinct blending with the pulse of their unresolved fears. They'd face whatever lay ahead as a team, fractured but unbroken. Chapter 28. June 23rd, 2000, 12:01 a.m. His weight, his secret, his burden. The city watched from the other side of the glass, blurry, twitching, pressed against a film of sweat and grime. Light bled in hesitant pulses as if it too was afraid to enter. The feeling that something was off didn't just linger, it pulsed beneath the skin, alive. Inside Gabe's apartment, the air hung dead and stale, thick as breath caught in a throat. The fan in the corner didn't move the heat so much as swirl it, dragging old smells, burnt coffee, dust, and something faintly metallic, through the room like ghosts looking for a way out. Gabe dropped his keys. They didn't clatter. They hit like punctuation, sharp, final. He peeled off his jacket, shoulders slumping with the weight of too many unfinished thoughts. The couch sighed beneath him, springs creaking, fabric surrendering like an old friend too tired to argue. Across from him, the Book of Devon waited on the table like it had always been there. Its spine cracked like old bone, gold lettering faded into near extinction. The labyrinth etched on the cover, impossibly intricate, shifted beneath the lamplight, its lines subtly writhing. Not quite an illusion, not entirely real. He hovered over it, fingers twitching. "Don't open it," his mind whispered. "But look anyway." He cracked the spine. The pages didn't turn. They unspooled. Paragraphs crawled like veins across brittle parchment, spiraling into paths that led nowhere but deeper. The ink was thick, layered, and frantic. Paragraphs packed with writing, some neat, some frenzied, a kind of madness layered over itself. Voices speaking atop one another, each desperate to be heard but unsure who was listening. The diagrams didn't sit still. They pulsed, bled at the edges. They were drawings, yes, but also something more, shapes that felt wrong just for existing. As if their very visibility tipped something cosmic out of balance, seen now when they never should have been. He stared, and the book did not blink. A pulse in the base of his skull, sharp and sudden, like déjà vu with teeth. His eyes skimmed the erratic scrawl, but the words slipped through his mind like sand through clenched fists. Each sentence felt designed to mislead, to ensnare, pulling him deeper into its cryptic web. A quote leaped from the page, faded but deliberate. This perspective is not something to be proven or imposed, but an idea to explore, to play with, and to consider. Imagine the power to dream any dream you desired, where one night could span 75 years of fulfillment and pleasure. The quote, attributed to author Alan Watts, sent a shiver down his spine. There was something alluring and unnerving about the idea, the suggestion that dreams could be manipulated, expanded into lifetimes of bliss or torment. He leaned back. "It's just philosophy," he muttered, too quickly. But his fingers didn't leave the page. They traced the words like old scar tissue, familiar and foreign, all at once. He flipped again. Anchors and pillars were no heroes. Morality did not choose them, nor did purpose. They were ordinary souls ensnared by cosmic design, their names carved into the remnants of the shattered hammer of creation, an eternal ledger of lives repurposed for the will of the divine. The hammer of creation and the anvil of truth. Gabe frowned, his brow furrowing as he read on. The tools were described as instruments of cosmic creation, symbols of ingenuity and truth, but the passage grew darker, detailing how the dreamer's tools had shattered under the strain of creating beings with free will. The fragments, now known as obols, scattered across reality, carrying the weight of their origins. The writing felt disjointed, as though whoever had written it was racing against time, their thoughts spiraling out of control. Gabe flipped to another section. Becoming the dreamer is waking up the dreamer. The origin point causes a rift. Some cultures say that earthquakes are signs of the dreamer stirring. Others attribute natural disasters, floods, storms, volcanic eruptions, to its restless slumber. His pulse ticked faster. He flipped through page after page, then stopped. Something about the next spread screamed for his attention. 7 pages, 7 figures, each one human, but only in theory, twisted, distorted. Their postures bent as if gravity forgot them, limbs contorted in ways the mind rejected before the eyes could comprehend. Faces either too smooth, like porcelain masks, or too jagged, like something carved in haste. Eyes, hollow, blackened. Tattoos etched across their skin, not drawn but seared in like brands. Symbols coiled around them, inked spirals and ancient glyphs that seemed to pulse beneath the page. Beneath each figure, a single title burned into the parchment in delicate, deliberate lettering. 7 archetypes, 7 echoes needed to wake the dreamer. A tyrant who wielded power without mercy, a lover whose passion became obsession, a guardian whose justice turned to vengeance, a giver whose generosity hid greed, a seeker whose curiosity unleashed destruction, a savior whose pride condemned those they sought to save. The names on his evidence board spun through his mind. Threads he'd followed snapped and tied again. He closed the book with a dull thump. The silence that followed was heavier than the pages themselves. The couch groaned beneath him as he leaned back, exhaustion settling in like dust. His eyes drifted to the open notebook on the table, names scribbled, circled, crossed out. All except one, Michelle Lewis. Why hadn't John Doe crossed her name out? He stared at it as if the answer might rise off the page. The others, scratched through, riddled with question marks, leads that led nowhere. But Michelle, she stayed, untouched, suspended in the center of it all, like a thread someone forgot to cut. He leaned back again, rubbing his eyes, voice barely a breath. What the hell are we missing? Then, tap, a hand on his shoulder. Morning, sunshine. Gabe frantically opened his eyes, but the apartment vanished. He was in a precinct, but not one he knew. The lighting blinked overhead, casting an anemic yellow glow that made everything look jaundiced. The scent hit first. Burnt coffee left too long on the warmer, and the must of old paper sweat and floor polish that couldn't hide the age of the place. A man passed behind him and sat down across the desk, broad-shouldered, thick-necked, built like a linebacker carved from patience and hard lessons. Rolled sleeves, pressed shirt. His face looked chiseled from restraint. Quiet strength behind eyes that had seen too much but hadn't looked away. Familiar yet impossible. Gabe's voice came low, almost automatic, more like a question. Brad. Brad offered a tired smile. Look at you, he said, voice low, almost reverent. Digging through the rot, piecing it together one breath too late. He gave a hollow chuckle. Took you long enough. Thought maybe you'd never get here. He leaned forward, shadows clinging to the lines of his face. But that's the trick, isn't it? You don't arrive until something breaks, and by then... He tapped the table once, softly. You're already in too deep. The wall beside them swam with clues, photos, scribbles, red string. But the center was empty, a blank space where meaning should be. Brad pointed at what seemed to be nothing. You keep tracing shadows. You need to look at what they're hiding. Before Gabe could answer, crash. A motorbike burst through the precinct wall in a storm of smoke and glass. Gabe flinched hard, thrown to the ground by the shockwave. Dust rained. Fire alarms screamed. Then silence. Brad didn't move, just turned. The bike began to hiss in the center of the chaos, metal twisted, engines sputtering. Gabe's ears rang as Brad walked through the wreckage and knelt by the crumpled rider. He peeled off the helmet. We met once before, but you wouldn't remember. As Gabe walked towards the flipped-over desks and waved the smoke away from his face, he noticed. The rider was Gabe, bruised, bleeding, barely breathing. A crimson 7 was carved from collarbone to abdomen, blood pooling toward the impact crater, then reversing, pulling inward, as if time hesitated, unsure whether to move forward or erase itself. Gabe's scar burned, sharp and sudden, as if the accident had just happened. He looked down. Red bled through his shirt, fresh and vivid. Brad didn't look away. This version of you, he said quietly, was trying to outrun the fear of the past, but it found you anyway. Gabe staggered up, heart hammering in his throat like it wanted out. The air felt heavier now, charged, intimate, like the moment remembered him. He stepped into the blood trail. It curled around his boots, warm and slow, like liquid memory seeping from a wound he thought had healed. Then, soft as a breath, a piece of paper floated down from nowhere, landing at the edge of the red stream. He bent to pick it up, fingers trembling. The name stared back at him in big, bold letters. Devin McIntyre. As he traced it with his fingertip, the ink bled beneath his skin, smearing, resisting, until only a single letter remained. D. It pulsed on the page like a bruise, bleeding through the fibers like a wound refusing to close. He swallowed as realization hit. You were the one who saved me that night? Brad tilted his head, gaze steady. The room temperature raised. Sirens began to blare. Brad's face flickered, blurred, jerky and disjointed, like a machine struggling against rusted gears, edges unraveling. For one beat, he was the man. The next, the figure Ashley described. The figure reached out, its hand hovering inches from Gabe's face. The world around him distorted, the shadows writhing like living things. He wanted to scream, to fight, but his body remained unresponsive. The voice that followed was layered, echoing from bone and dream. Stop looking for answers around corners. Look for the cracks. Crack. The sound didn't just split the sirens, it split reality. Gabe's hands shook violently, his notebook slipping from his grasp and landing with a muffled thud on the carpet. He was back in his apartment. His chest heaved, lungs clawing for air as if the encounter had drained the oxygen from the room. The shadows clung to the edges of his vision, rippling with an unnatural rhythm that defied logic, taunting the boundaries of what his mind could still accept as real. He forced himself to look. The page lay open on the carpet, faded ink, frantic handwriting. The list of names stared up at him, and then it hit him. The paper from the crash, the one in the dream, Devin McIntyre. But here, in his own handwriting, someone had tried to write the same name, only to stop. The letter D, scratched out hastily, as if whoever had written it changed their mind at the last second. Gabe ran a hand through his hair, eyes wide. His fingers dug into the edges of his notebook. His pulse thundered in his ears as he found the name beneath the D, Michelle Lewis, the only name not crossed out. He frowned, flipping back through pages worn from too many nights like this one. Something didn't add up. Why scratch out the others but not her? Why stop at the D? Devin. The image returned. The red smear, the bleeding ink, the paper that refused to forget. His foot tapped anxiously against the floor. His thoughts spiraled. Had Devin hidden himself in plain sight? Had he made them chase shadows while leaving his own breadcrumb trail the entire time? No, that was paranoia talking, wasn't it? But the weight in his chest said otherwise. He scribbled into the notebook with shaking hands. Michelle Lewis to Karen? Devin's file? The letters were crooked, uneven, desperate. Something wasn't adding up. The room felt too small, the air too thick. He grabbed his phone, his fingers tightening around it as he dialed Ashley's number. It rang and rang. No answer. Gabe clenched his jaw, staring at the screen as the call disconnected. Ashley always picked up. He hit redial. Still nothing. Damn it. He tossed the phone onto the couch, rubbing his temples. Something wasn't adding up, and the pieces were slipping through his fingers faster than he could hold them together. He stood, pacing the room, his thoughts a chaotic storm. His notebook sat open on the coffee table, its pages filled with case notes he wasn't sure he wanted to understand. Gabe swallowed hard. I have to keep this to myself. They couldn't know he was unraveling too. Not now. Not when Ashley was already showing cracks, and Karen was carrying more than anyone should. So he'd do what men do. Stuff it down, put a lid on it, shove it to the bottom shelf and bury it behind dry humor and tired eyes and half-meant words. He'd man up, whatever the hell that meant anymore. He'd follow up with Karen in the morning, see if this led down another rabbit hole. But tonight it stayed his weight, his secret, his burden.